It is now time, folks, for our keynote presentation. And I want to introduce our keynote speaker, who is the Executive Director of the National Trust of Canada, Ms. Natalie Bull. As Executive Director of the National Trust for Canada, Natalie leads a national charity that is part of a global network of organizations working to protect and celebrate places that matter. She is committed to making the National Trust an essential source of proven tools and leadership for Canadians working to save and renew places that matter. The Trust programs celebrate places that tell our collective stories and provide essential expertise for struggling downtowns, remote regions, and diverse communities. Prior to joining the National Trust in 2006, Natalie was part of the City of Ottawa's Heritage Planning Team and later held a range of positions in the federal government's nationwide Heritage Conservation Directorate. A fellow and former president of the Association for Preservation Technology International, Natalie has worked with project teams at iconic places including the Bayou Ranch, Parliament Hill, and the Vimy Monument in France, and led technical training courses on historic window conservation and building envelope issues in historic buildings. However, saying all that, she is happiest when glazing sash or jacking up the barn at the old family farm in New Brunswick. I'm going to turn it now over to you, Natalie Bull, as she's going to speak to us on a 2020 vision, Disrupted, the Heritage Movement and What Matters Now. Natalie.
Thank you very much, Sheldon. Can everyone hear me? It's so unusual not to be there with you and to see faces and be able to connect, but I'm really pleased to bring greetings on behalf of the board and staff of the National Trust and our Manitoba Governor, Barbara Myers. Bonjour du Nouveau-Brunswick, la seule province qui est officiellement bilingue. I've been here in my home province of New Brunswick since the beginning of the pandemic. And it's a pleasure to bring greetings to mes collègues francophones au Manitoba. I'd like to acknowledge too that here in New Brunswick, I'm on the unceded territory of the Wolastoqey people, and I'm very close to the banks of the beautiful river that they call the Wolastoq. And it's such a privilege to be here, and taking a moment to acknowledge territory is one way for us to make a small gesture toward reconciliation. Congratulations for this the organization of this event, and really congratulations for casting the net so widely across the heritage sector, which we all know is vast. And I'm really excited about your program, which really touches on some incredibly vital topics. And so thanks very much for inviting me to speak to you today. And I wanted to share some of my thoughts on disruption of the heritage movement and really what matters now. So I do have a presentation. I'm wondering if folks there locally are able to show that on the screen. Would it be better if I just show I'm not sure if people will be able to see what I'm seeing. And I could just, oh, that's looking better. Is everyone seeing that full screen? Great, let's try that. Just a few words, maybe first, we could go to the next slide. A few words about the National Trust. We're a national registered charity that helps communities save places that matter to them. We think of historic places as an important gateway to bigger ideas and bigger themes. It's a way through these places to tell diverse stories and touch on the cultures that make up our country. And that they really have the power to do so much more. We know that investing in and renewing historic places is a way for us to really address pressing social needs. If you want to just go to the next slide. And is this working for people? You can see I could just share my screen if that would be easier, but I'm hoping that you're seeing everything there on the screen. We, like National Trusts around the world, we follow in some ways the classic National Trust methodology of celebrating fabulous historic places that are open to the public. But as I said earlier, we do see the importance of these places as doing so much more, that it's not just about beautiful places to visit. It is really about changing the way people see our country and learning about our history. So the next slide. A big part of the work that we do is in being a catalyst and working with communities to share tools and resources that help them use places that matter in their communities to address those pressing social needs. Our conference last fall about this time we were so pleased to be in Winnipeg, and I know I see some familiar faces are part of the lineup for the conference today, and it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. At our conferences and through other mechanisms, we do what we can to share tools and resources, success stories with Canadians across the country. We know that heritage is local, and we really need to reach into local communities and share these strategies for saving and renewing these places that have such an important role in our communities. Next slide. So I think that's just a view of the Winnipeg conference last year. More than 500 people came together for that event. And it was really a pleasure for the Trust to be back in Manitoba and in Winnipeg, a place that where we have a long history. Just keep going, scrolling ahead. An important part of the conference last year was the Mamikwendan gathering, where we brought together survivors and leaders to talk about the significance of remembering the residential school system and the tragedy that it was for our country through these places that are tangible touchstones with that terrible history. And it was certainly, we were pleased to work with the Long Plain First Nation, and we were so excited to recently hear about the designation of the Portage La Prairie Residential School as a National Historic Site. So again, one of those ways that historic places can do the important work of telling the truth and helping us remember and really change the way that we move forward together as a country. Next slide, please. Our own conference is actually firing up, where we have pre-conference events happening as we speak, and the main conference will start on Monday. And we're sad not to be in Edmonton. We'll be, as you are today, running our conference virtually. So lots of challenges, but we're also really pleased with the uptake. And I think this new virtual way of meeting is in many ways much more democratic. It's possible for so many more people to be part of the movement and to be part of these events where we share successes and talk about the challenges that we have together. So the next slide, please. Maybe we can just skip quickly through these, but just some other ways above and beyond our conference that we are reaching out and sharing resources with the heritage movement. Our Launchpad coaching program has actually touched down in a couple of places in Manitoba. And just keep scrolling along there. Our Endangered Places Toolkit. Many of you may know the National Trust for our top 10 endangered places list. And as part of, and I think many sites in Manitoba as well participated in Canada Historic Places Day, which went from being an in-person event on one day of the summer. This year it turned into 2 months of celebrating historic places across the country. Some of it on the ground in places, but a lot of it over social media. So again, the democratization of heritage and being able to share it with many more people through virtual means. So the next slide, I think just coming back to the topic that I wanted to talk about today, just really sharing with you some of the issues and the topics that are in my mind and on my heart these days. What matters to us now? And I know part of the conversation at this conference today will be about challenges and opportunities. And I would say, I think we're beyond opportunities. I think we really need to talk about imperatives, the things that we really need to come together and make happen as a sector in order for us to play the role that we can play in our country at this really challenging moment. Next slide, please. So it's been really an exciting and historic moment over the last 6 months. The world has really changed in so many ways. COVID obviously hitting us in early in the spring and really disrupting the way that we do everything. And we're feeling the effects of that today with virtual conferences and the impact that many historic sites open to the public have experienced in what would normally have been their most lucrative time of welcoming visitors and generating revenue. So it's really been very disruptive. We've also seen but I think it's also been a real period of opportunity. I know during the first few months of working remotely and connecting with my team and talking about what is important for us now as an organization, it was actually quite exhilarating. And I think we all can benefit from this period of looking critically at what we do and stepping away from things that we may have always done that might not have been serving us as heritage advocates and as organizations. And certainly the trust, I mentioned our endangered places list earlier, we've actually given ourselves permission to think differently about how we use the endangered places list. And we've got, I think, a new approach that will make it much more timely and impactful for these places that matter to us. It's also been a moment with recent events worldwide, bringing attention to social justice, the need for social justice and social equity, and the toppling of monuments, I think has really shown us how politically charged and potentially powerful our work with historic places with heritage more generally can be. So on to my next slide. Just a few little things I wanted us to think about. So this statement that we're in the people business, almost my first day on the job at the helm of the National Trust, a colleague in British Columbia said to me, Natalie, you may think you're in the buildings business, but we're all really in the people business. It's really about how we connect with people that will move this movement forward. And I would say that is even more important today. And it's a broader mandate than it might have been when Rick Goodacre said those words to me over 10 years ago. It's the work that we do in heritage is really for everyone, not just for some people. And I think as organizations and heritage advocates, we really have a lot of work to do, the National Trust included, in really getting our heads around what that means for us. Next slide, please. In 2016, the publication of the calls to action for reconciliation coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think that was a first long overdue wake-up call for organizations that we really need to understand what reconciliation means, and for us in the heritage sector, what that looks like. I'm showing on my screen an excerpt from some work done by the First Peoples Cultural Council in BC, looking at what is needed to ensure the protection of Indigenous cultural heritage. And that first recommendation there is about Indigenous leadership and control. We really need to, not just through tokenism and appointing board members and talking about reconciliation, we really need to move to action in making our organizations not just more inclusive, but also part of a movement of anti-racism. So I think that's a really exciting and important imperative that we all share in our work in heritage at this moment. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So at the National Trust, we've been really thankful for board members like Lorna Croshoe, who has been at the forefront of helping us think about how all the work that we do can respond to a reconciliation lens. Lorna encouraged us to adopt the TRC principles and to look at all of the work that we do in a much more open and inclusive way. But just reconciliation, I wouldn't even pretend to say that we've done everything we need to do as an organization to embrace reconciliation. And at the same time, the notion of inclusion is really now needs to be so much broader and deeper. And so we're learning about the need to get beyond the crisis of whiteness in heritage institutions, starting with our own, and to find new ways to hear from, to respect, and to share power with underrepresented peoples and histories. So earlier this summer, as part of these gatherings that the National Trust has been convening, and I'll mention a bit later, we brought together a panel heritage leaders who just also happen to be Black, Indigenous, and people of color. They came together to really talk to each other and to the heritage sector about how the heritage movement, how heritage advocates can be part of a movement, again, not just of diversity and inclusion, but of anti-racism. And it was really Natasha Henry from the Ontario Black History Society who told me, Natalie, it isn't just about diversity. It isn't just about window dressing and appointing a board member. It requires action on the part of organizations to be part of this movement. So we really need to rethink our systems, our organizations, our policies, our practices. We need to give over place and space for the communities that have typically been underrepresented or completely absent in the work that we do. And I've enjoyed getting to know colleagues here in New Brunswick. My colleague Graham Nickerson, who has talked about how Black loyalists, Black people in Atlantic Canada are really absent from the story. And so that's really an important part of the work that we need to do. The LGBTQ community as well. And I know my colleagues in the British National Trust have done a lot of work in bringing LGBTQ stories to the forefront at their sites. And it hasn't always been easy. The public reaction has not always been overwhelmingly positive. But I think it's important for us as heritage organizations and advocates to do that work. And to remove all the other barriers that might stand in the way of people appreciating the history and the places that matter to us. So let's go on to the next challenge and imperative is really to get traction on this idea that the greenest building is the one that already exists. And I know that not everyone at this forum is focused on historic places, but it is, as I said earlier, one of the gateways that we can use to tell stories and to engage a broader audience. So we've been talking about the link between sustainable development and heritage for so long, and we really still have so much more work to do. We know that Canada became a signatory to the COP21 Paris Agreement in 2015, making big commitments to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And the only way to do that, well, one of the big important ways to do that is really through addressing how we treat our existing buildings. 75 to 80% of Canada's existing buildings will still be around in 2030. So it's really imperative that we focus immediately on their sustainable rehabilitation and retrofitting. So at the next slide, we know there are great success stories like the Buchanan Building Complex in Vancouver, a great success story in the benefit of investing in reusing and retrofitting an existing building rather than sending it to the landfill. It had a great benefit for the environment, but also financially, also a very successful approach to using our existing building stock. But on the next slide, you'll see that that's not always the case. And too often we see an incredible investment in embodied energy. For an example, at the Ristine building in Fredericton, demolished last year, made of granite. What could be more durable than a building constructed of granite? But yet it was demolished, pushed out of the way for new residential construction. Many of us like to quote Jane Jacobs' statement from her 1961 publication, The Life and Death of Great American Cities. She said, old ideas can sometimes use new buildings, but new ideas must use old buildings. So one of the new ideas I think we all need to be talking about in the heritage movement, we go ahead to the next slide, is the circular economy. So this idea that it's not a direct line to the landfill, it's more than just recycling. It's really about taking a broader and more comprehensive approach to getting the most out of everything we already have, and more than just reusing, but at every stage in the life cycle. And I'm speaking specifically about buildings here, but it applies more broadly to everything that we do in society, that idea of the circular economy. So if you maybe just go to the next slide, if those of you who attended our conference, the National Trust Conference in Winnipeg last year, saw an amazing presentation by a gentleman from the Lendagger Group in Denmark, I think, who showed great examples of how historic buildings are literally being dismantled and recycled and integrated into new construction. But we don't have to only focus our attention at that sort of the very end of the life cycle. We need to also be talking more creatively and more forcefully about how to get people thinking at the midpoint in the life cycle of some of these buildings before we are at the point of taking them down and demolishing them. So, and I think as the National Trust is just about to complete a study where we look at all of the barriers that make it harder for us to recycle and reuse the buildings while they are still standing. Essentially, the construction industry and attitudes in society, the tax regime, the land use planning process, all of these systems contain really strong systemic barriers to reusing existing buildings. And so that's a big part of the work that we need to do in this sector. Next slide, please. We've talked about the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think these are getting more and more traction worldwide. And if we go to the next slide, we can just look specifically at the 11th Sustainable Development Goal. And I love how inclusive and broad the goal around this goal, the way this goal is stated. It's not just about buildings, it's really about people. Again, we're in the people business, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So that's work that we have to do. And on the next slide, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Climate Heritage Network. The National Trust is a signatory. We actually announced it last fall at our Winnipeg conference. And the Trust is hosting the North American Regional Network meeting for this group of organizations and individuals and cities and governments who are committed to making that strong connection between heritage, culture, and the environment. So we'll be happy to share information with that about you as we get closer to that date. And then on to the next slide. So if the idea of the environmental benefits of heritage don't sell you on the idea of reuse, green jobs, I think we must absolutely now talk more than we ever have before about the connection between heritage and the economy and the creation of jobs. On the next slide, at the beginning of the pandemic, we brought together a group of heritage organizations from across the country and talked about what would be the most powerful statement or message or action we could take right now. And we agreed that it was really about getting out in front of the idea of what kind of government stimulus will be introduced to help our economy recover as we come out of this pandemic. And we agreed that it really would be about encouraging government to invest not in new infrastructure that has a negative impact for the environment, but in investing in existing, in heritage places and in heritage more generally. And with our colleagues across the country, we crowdsourced a list that added up to $371 million worth of work at historic places, at museums, at cultural agencies that would create new green jobs and could be part of an economic recovery. So again, we know that not everyone loves heritage. We know that not everyone loves the environment, but we need to find the places where we connect with people who are making important decisions, and certainly the economy needs to be one of those messages that we use. On to the next slide. So we've got lots of work to do as the movement. One of the areas I think is in changing ourselves and the way that we talk about what we value in heritage. So on to the next slide. I wanted to share very briefly I know that the work you're doing here today as part of this summit is to look at the state of heritage in Manitoba, and there have been lots of sort of stock-taking efforts over the last few years to do that. Showing you on the screen the report that the City of Toronto put together, and one of the name of their report card is Changing the Narrative, and it really focuses on the importance of rethinking the way that we talk about heritage and the messages that we use and the audiences that we need to connect with. So building on that, the National Trust with partners from across the country, on the next slide, commissioned a national public opinion poll, and it was focused on buildings, but heritage buildings, but I think it's something that all aspects of our sector need to do more of. And so we asked questions about, to a general audience, what interests you in heritage? What is it about heritage places that grabs you and gets you excited? And the findings were really interesting, and maybe we can just skip. We got a good response. 90% of Canadians feel that it's important to preserve and adapt our country's sites, but why? So on to the next slide. We can maybe skip through. Let's skip this one as well. Oops, sorry, now you're going too fast. Let's just go back to the previous slide. What are the most important reasons to preserve? And you can see there's a lot of information here on this slide, but you can see the top, the options that had the most traction were more at the emotional end of the scale. So they were about storytelling, they were about reminders of the past, they were about connecting with culture. And further down on the scale of the reasons, the important reasons to preserve historic places were the more rational reasons, like property values, sources of affordable space for nonprofits, reducing environmental impacts. So that I think is the beginning of an important wake-up call for us. I think it's something we've been talking about for many years, the notion of stories, but for us to have real data telling us what a broader audience, not just people who are already part of the converted, care about, can really help us as we shape the work that we do and the approaches that we take. And the next slide too, this survey told us that this notion of a badge of pride, that people really feel pride in these places that are part of our communities, and that's an area where we can really get traction and think about how we build that into the way that we do business. So there are lots of really great data from this survey, and I won't go into detail because I think my time is running out, but we can just scroll through. The next slide is about people, what would drive people to find out more. And then interestingly, I think we went into this public opinion poll expecting that environmental benefits might be the most powerful connection that we could make. And while it did show us that people do agree and recognize that preserving and adapting existing buildings is environmentally friendly, it wasn't one of the most emotionally engaging arguments that we might consider using. So that just a bit of insight into our audiences and the importance of knowing that. On the next slide, so again, more work that we have to do on the notion of data and being able to make our arguments more powerfully with numbers and data. And so this is a made up infographic. Don't be quoting these numbers. We've done some work on mapping out what a report card that measures and reports on the benefit, the impact of historic places might look like. And so this is an infographic talking about how historic places build a strong economy, So, but the sad part is we really can't talk, we don't know these numbers. We can't actually build an accurate infographic that we can use when we're talking to elected officials and other decision makers about the power of the heritage sector to the Canadian economy. So that's an important area that we need to keep working on. And on the next slide, so how we position our sector. The heritage sector is broad, and I think the museum sector has done a good job of capturing data in collaboration with government in order to be able to make some of those important arguments. The arts and culture sector as well has done that, but there are so many other parts of the heritage movement that aren't reflected here, and where I think there really is a powerful opportunity to talk about numbers of jobs, amount of impact. There are so many heritage grants being given out, but we don't have any sort of go-to place to talk about the economic impact that those investments are making. So that idea of leverage, I think, is something that we all really need to get better at measuring and tracking and understanding, and that requires collaboration and investment on the parts of organizations and governments to get us there. So, and then just a final point I'd like to make is about, again, getting back to where I started, the notion of diversity and inclusion. This is an image from Winnipeg last year. The National Trust brings together the leaders of provincial heritage NGOs across the country every year at our conference, and we stay in touch with them through the year, and now we'll do so even more over on the phone and using platforms like Zoom. But if you look at this, if you look at these faces, they all look a lot like each other, and with very few exceptions. And again, I think it's just an important reminder for us we really need to find ways to invite everyone in and remove the barriers to participation in heritage. Onto the next slide. We've been doing something that we started at the beginning of the pandemic called the gatherings of the heritage sector, gatherings of the heritage movement. And we're now proposing to continue to do those once a month, I think on maybe the third Tuesday of the month, as a way just to basically have an open line conversation with heritage advocates and organizations across the country, and to do this work together of understanding what's important for the movement, what is needed now, what are these imperatives that we need to focus on together, and how do we share the load and share our own successes together. So it's something that we're trying to do. We'd love to have all of you involved with this summit to be part of those conversations. And I think with that, I will, the next slide shows our social media contacts. If any of you would like to follow us, if you scroll up a bit further, you can see our social media contacts. I really just want to thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm happy to answer questions if there's time. And I'm looking forward to hearing all the great speakers and the participants and what you will bring to this important event for the province of Manitoba today. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Natalie. We do have time for one or two questions. I guess I would indicate to you, we probably could have considered having canned applause. I don't know if you heard that or not. There we are. There's all 10 in the room. Natalie, maybe the simplest question to move to actually is, you are putting on maybe your first ever virtual conference. What are some of the challenges that you see in putting that together?
Well, I think we've all that's left for us now is the fear of how it will actually unfold. I think uncertainty. I think so many of us are grappling with the uncertainty of how this all will work. And hats off to the organizers of this event. It started off with some technical struggles, but everyone hung in, and it seems to be working well. Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we always think of our conference as much about human connection and being face to face, meeting with people in person that we would normally only be talking to over the phone. I was in Winnipeg not too long ago. It feels like a long time ago now, but it was just earlier this year, and had a chance to sit down with Gordon Goldsborough and with Cindy Tugwell from two important organizations there in Manitoba. And I felt that we moved our collective markers so much further ahead by being in the same room and talking together. So that's one of the things that is missing. But yeah, it's a new world, and I think we can just embrace the new opportunities that we have. And I think there are lots of silver linings coming out of this crazy pandemic.
We have to find them, don't we, Natalie? Maybe just going back to one of your last slides, it sort of reveals a question, and that would be, what's the strategy for encouraging diversity? Yeah, well, and I don't pretend that I or my organization know everything we need to know about this, but I think what I have found that one important key is through real relationships. Just talking and getting to know people and feeling comfortable. And we've had a great working relationship with a relatively new national organization, the Indigenous Heritage Circle. And
I've gone out for dinner with Karen Aird, who leads that organization and will be a major speaker at our conference next week. We really have to know each other and develop real relationships. It isn't enough to just, as I said in my talk, like appointing people to boards and having names on letterhead is one step, but it has to be real movement. And one of the things, like, through this relationship that we've built with the leaders of the Indigenous Heritage Circle, we came together and put together a joint submission for funding to hire an intern that would be shared between our two organizations. So we'll be hiring a young Indigenous graduate, and I'm just so excited about making that real. Like, instead of just talking about two organizations working in partnership, we will actually have a young Indigenous person who is passionate about heritage, who will help both of our organizations move forward on initiatives that we think will help change the game. So again, making it real, it's really about people and relationships and listening.
Thank you so much. I think we got time for just one more, Natalie. And what can we do here in Manitoba to support more federal incentives for our heritage?
What you can do in Manitoba? Well, so incentives are really one part of the picture in encouraging this shift to thinking about historic places as part of the circular economy and places worth investing in. So I think it connects to the idea of building the audience. Like, the National Trust has worked for literally decades talking about the idea of a rehabilitation tax incentive. But when there was a private members bill a couple of years ago proposing such an incentive, we all scrambled to try and get our members writing letters to support that idea, but we really just didn't have enough horsepower. We need many Canadians to be part of this movement, to have any kind of political influence. So, and it can't just be the heritage converted who are talking about that. I think one of the barriers I'm starting to recognize as I do this work is that often the places that we care about, that we're trying to encourage the preservation of, they don't belong to us. So there are third parties out there that we need to connect with and influence. And it's really those owners of historic places that need to be part of the advocacy pressure, saying out loud and in the media how much more they could do in preserving great places if some of these systemic barriers were removed. And one of the systemic barriers is the sometimes the higher costs associated with treating those buildings properly. So I hope that answered your question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Natalie. And thank you for sharing both your time and your thoughts with us today. That was really, really enjoyable and very insightful. So thanks to Natalie. And may I now call it, it's really time for a bit of a break, folks. So we can take 15 minutes. We'll come back at 10:30 Manitoba time anyway. And so let's take a break.